Hello and welcome to episode 100 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I am in a celebratory mood, and of course, who better to join me on this very special episode than my co-host, Mr. Devin Dundee.
Sigmund, happy 100! I cannot believe we're at 100 episodes already. I think you and I have been doing this together for a couple of years. There were a few episodes before you and I started doing it together, but still a pretty awesome milestone to hit 100 episodes of our podcast. I'm really excited to celebrate with you and to jump into the world of Apple TV together.
Yeah, I remember when starting this, wondering if there would be enough going on in the world of Apple TV to sustain a weekly podcast. And we recently had a conversation where that was questioned, and we said, oh yes, if we fall 1 week behind, we're in trouble.
Yes.
So, yeah, 100 episodes, hopefully 100 more to come. Coming up on the show this week is, of course, our 100th episode, Ask Us Anything Special, which I'm slightly nervous about, Devin, alongside a stacked week of Apple Arcade and Apple original releases. But we begin with our highlight, the return of Slow Horses with Season 3.
A romantic liaison in Istanbul threatens to expose a buried MI5 secret in London. When Jackson Lamb and his team of misfits are dragged into the fight, they find themselves caught in a conspiracy that threatens the future not just of Slough House, but of MI5 itself.
What's the plan? I need good agents, but I just have the slow horses. Some backup might be handy.
Well, I'm busy.
Don't think you're getting a gold star.
This series stars, of course, Gary Oldman as Jackson Lamb himself, Jack Loudon as River Cartwright, Rosalind Eliezer as Louisa Guy, Saskia Reeves as Catherine Standish, Kristen Scott Thomas as Diana Tavner, and new this season, Sope Dirisu as Sean Donovan, adapted by Will Smith from the Mick Herron series of novels. Sigmund, tell us a little bit about Slow Horses Season 3.
Well, Devin, I think I'm not alone in saying I have been waiting with bated breath for this return to talk about the show that I think is one of the best Apple originals on the service. Slow Horses is as brilliant as it ever has been, but I want to preface that by saying that I know there will be a few people out there that maybe quickly and wrongly dismiss the show come season 1. It does have this ultra dry humour. It's led by some incredibly unlikable characters, and it's set in a very grim London. But Slow Horses is just brilliant. Season 3 begins in Istanbul with Lover's Betrayal in the run-up to the potential leaking of a document codenamed Footprint, followed by a mighty night and day chase that ends in tragedy just outside of the empty Ali Sami Yen Stadium, the home of Galatasaray. That tragedy spurs the Slow Horses to action. The Slow Horses are headed once again by Jackson Lamb, who, whilst waiting for a checkup at the doctor in the first episode of this season, is wrongly recognised as a vagrant having a nap. He, of course, is continuing to do what he's been doing to his body since the first time we came into contact with Jackson Lamb. Curries, kebabs, alcohol, and the kind of chain-smoking antics and grease-fueled exterior that's the antithesis of what you would expect from an undercover spy. Underneath the grumpy exterior that sees him on his last legs is an incredibly sharp intellect, and whilst we've seen hints of his past in previous seasons, it's this season where Jackson Lamb is truly prompted into action, following his right-hand lady Catherine getting involved with the extreme edge of the park being the head office of MI5. River Cartwright ends up deep within the park when he shouldn't be, whilst continuing to be Lamb's central whipping boy. But it's the fellow rejects who in this third season are also outside doing agency work as they're hit with a situation that must be solved without the interference of HQ for many, many different reasons. What I loved about the opening couple of episodes in this season were that, straight to the point, we see characters that we've learnt to love put into harm's way. And whilst last 2 seasons have given each character in the show background, this time I feel like the writing from Will Smith and his team feels far more personal. The characters have these situations that aren't purely used as a dumping ground for exposition. Will Smith and his writing team, they've done a superb job here, not only in making the dry humour slightly more accessible this time around, but by also filling this third season with some incredibly well-paced, high-octane action set pieces. Devon, season 3, it's just 6 episodes, so this has to be a very quick in and out job, in fear of either of us ruining anything for those that have been looking forward to the return of Slow Horses. Can't wait to talk more about it at the end of December. Suffice to say, Season 3 isn't our last. Season 4, I believe, will release in the first half of next year and has already completed. There are, of course, 8 books from Mick Herron, plus 4 novellas digging deeper into the Slow Horses universe, so hopefully much more to come. Well worth the Apple TV Plus subscription alone. But very quickly, what were your thoughts on your first taste of Season 3?
Well, we kick off really strong, like you said, with that action sequence that I really enjoyed. The show does a great job with those chase scenes. They're a lot of fun to watch. And it's a great introduction to a couple of new characters for the show as well. And then we get right back, of course, to Gary Oldman. He's just being peak Jackson Lamb when we pick up with him. I love that sense of humor. Like you said, I think they are making it a little bit more accessible this season, which is great. But it's still the classic one-liners that we're expecting from Jackson Lamb. One of my favorite tropes of his is the way he'll just tell his team, like, I've already figured this out. You need to catch up or you're fired, basically. He doesn't give them the information. He just tells them to figure it out the way he has because, like you said, he's brilliant. And he does lead them along in very strange, zigzaggy ways. But yeah, I'm excited to be back in this world and seeing what happens next with the Slow Horses. And I'm excited that we're going to be spending a lot more time with them, not only over this season and next season, but hopefully many more to come.
Well, we'll continue to get a feel for the real MI5 organisation with the first 2 episodes of Season 3, now streaming on Apple TV+. Now, also beginning this week, Devon, are our expected 4K upgrades in the TV app for the month of December, starting with the Colour Purple, Titanic, and Young Guns. Should be mentioned, the Titanic upgrade is already available in the TV app. I had an upgrade from an old code that came with a physical copy of that film, and that's upgraded to 4K, Dolby Atmos, Dolby Vision. Very, very happy about that. And no doubt, with there being a physical 3D release of Titanic, I'd imagine we'll see that come to Vision Pro at some point. Also later this month, on December 12th, we'll see 4K upgrades for Aliens and The Wailing. And later this month, I'm really, really happy about this, the 4K releases, finally for the first time on the TV app. I've been waiting a long time for these. True Lies and The Abyss. Of course, we do most of our purchasing through the TV app, but there are those that still make their purchases through the iTunes app and the iTunes Movies and iTunes TV show apps on Apple TV. Well, tvOS 17.2 Beta 4 released this week. We're creeping ever so closely to the expected retirement of those apps when the update finally ships. But for fans of box sets amongst us, rest well, as the TV app has begun including box sets at the bottom of series listings. Really, really cool to see, and a great eye there. Big thank you for that tip to Jason Matt. Really, really happy about that. That's one issue solved with the TV app. It's going to be interesting to see if maybe the TV app gets some shortcut actions to replace the iTunes actions. Lots going on. Still very excited, but still lots to be done in the meantime.
Now, it is the season for holiday shopping and gift giving. I know a lot of people will be purchasing gift cards to give to friends and family so that they can buy their favorite films and TV shows on their Apple devices. But if you're purchasing gift cards or any kind of hardware for the holiday season, make sure that when you're shopping in the Apple Store or at apple.com that you use Apple Pay, because Apple's doing something really special right now in honor of World AIDS Day on December 1st. From November 28th through December 8th, Apple will donate $1 to the Global Fund for every purchase made with Apple Pay on apple.com, in the Apple Store app, or at an Apple store. So your holiday shopping can help provide HIV treatment and fight AIDS, a cause that Apple has been proud to support for many years through the Product Red initiative. So if you're going to be buying some Apple goodies for your loved ones this year, you can also do a little bit of good by making sure to use Apple Pay when you check out.
Of course, this all started, I believe, many years ago with the Red edition of the iPod Classic, and has continued to be a major pillar in the legacy of Apple. I wonder if one day we might see a red version of the Apple TV remote maybe replace the black dial and the buttons with red buttons.
Oh, yeah, that'd be cool. I would love to see some red accents on the Apple TV remote. I think some people would be really excited about that. For now, we'll have to use our regular Siri remotes to watch the upcoming Apple original series Criminal Record, which received its first trailer this week. In the heart of London, an anonymous call draws two detectives into a fight to correct an old miscarriage of justice.
Go ahead, just tell us. I killed her.
I'm investigating an allegation. What if he's innocent?
That case was investigated fairly. We got our man.
No, you got a confession.
She's got it in for us.
That's the game, collateral damage.
Are you going to stop me?
So, Criminal Record hails from Paul Ruttman and stars Peter Capaldi and Cush Jumbo. We got to see this trailer literally moments before we started recording. So, what are your first thoughts on this upcoming British thriller?
This is very much a classic detective story. You've got the young gun, the up-and-comer, who's very gung-ho and wants to make sure that everything's done by the book, comes in with new evidence about an old case, to the seasoned detective who's on the downhill part of his career, enjoying the work that he's done and doesn't want anybody messing, of course, with his record. And then you've got the clash. He thinks he got the person based on their confession. And of course, the young detective says, no, you didn't do your due diligence. We've got the wrong guy. That puts these two at odds, creates for some very interesting dynamics where it's less about maybe finding the truth, but more about just being right, proving the other person wrong. And of course, there's going to be power dynamics that play out. One line that stuck out to me during this trailer, one of the young detective's coworkers tells her, hey, don't mess with this guy. He's one of the good ones, which of course is one of those lines that gets thrown out very often in these sorts of shows. So the question is he one of the good ones, or did he end up covering up something that maybe he shouldn't have? This does look like an intriguing series and one that will be interesting to check out when it premieres on January 10th on Apple TV+.
Coming not too far behind Criminal Record is another thriller, Manhunt, based on the Edgar Award-winning non-fiction book from author James Lee Swanson. This is a conspiracy thriller about one of the best-known but least understood crimes in history, the astonishing story of the hunt for John Wilkes Booth in the aftermath of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. This is a show that I know we've both been highly anticipating, confirmed to be a 7-part limited series, and based on the fact that Apple like their releases to be topical, we can expect this mid-February to commemorate President's Day in the US. But now, of course, it's time to commemorate episode 100 of Magic Rays of Light with a AMA. Ask Me Anything? No, it's 2 of us. It's an AUA, Devon. I'm slightly nervous about this one.
Well, Sigmund, I don't think there's anything to be nervous about. Of course, we put out to our listeners the opportunity to ask any questions that they want of us. We said Apple TV related or not Apple TV related. We've got a good mix of both. And I trust our listeners, so I think this is going to be fun. To kick off, we've got a question from Daryl Baxter, who asks, what would both of your wishes be for tvOS 18 and the next Apple TV 4K? And similarly, Simon asks, how, if anything, would you like to see Apple TV change or improve? This is something we talk about a lot on the show, Sigmund. What are your thoughts?
Oh, how do I sum this up without it being a half-hour segment in its own right? These are the things that I'd like to see, I think, next year. I'd like to see customized home screens per user. I'd like to see widget support because I do think there's space there. Maybe some shortcut support. Automations is something that we are trying to fill the gap of what's been left over here on the podcast. When it comes to hardware, I think we can expect a new Apple TV 4K early next year. And the things that I'd like to see, Devon, one of which probably has a good chance and the other probably doesn't. But let's go with it. The new iPhone chip, I would love to see, to be able to play those console quality games on the Apple TV, something that I feel is lacking right now. From a nerdy point of view, what I'd love to see is HDMI in on the next hardware. I think I've mentioned this before, but I always felt that HDMI eARC was one step towards a future where the Apple TV could end up controlling all of the sources. And how cool would it be if you could have HDMI in and completely override the operating system on smart TVs, which, you know, normally only get support for a few years. So that's what I'd love to see. We already can control audio through eARC. I'd love to be able to control video sources via the Apple TV as well.
Yeah, I like that idea. I would love to see that come, maybe with some kind of expansion to add more inputs if needed, but maybe one by default. Apple likes to, control the experience, so it would be a great way to get a more in-depth Apple TV experience without actually having to have Apple make the TV itself, which is, of course, something that we always talk about as well. Now, what I'd like to see in tvOS 18 is some more system-wide design elements inspired by the new TV app sidebar. I really like the design of the redesigned TV app that is being tested in tvOS 17.2 right now. I really like the translucency. I really like the density of the information, and I would like to see that style come to all the system apps and to the system itself throughout tvOS. So I think we're getting a glimpse at the future of tvOS design with that redesigned TV app, and I would like to see that continue to expand with tvOS 18. I love home screen widgets. We've got them everywhere else, right? We've got them on the iPhone, iPad, and Mac, and really even on the Apple Watch with your Smart Stack that you can scroll down to. So now I'd like them on the Apple TV. Let me see my to-dos and my weather and everything else up on the big screen. Some people may not like that, but personally, I would really love to have that option. I'd love to see the Up Next queue expanded to have options for multiple queues that can be sorted manually. At the very least, I would love a queue for shows that I watch with my partner and a queue for shows that I watch by myself. You could even, have an option where you could pick multiple profiles in Control Center, and only when 2 profiles are picked do you have that special Up Next queue that's shared between you. Something like that would be cool, but also just the ability to create custom queues in the TV app, I think would be awesome. And then my super far out there wish, wish casting for tvOS 18, I would love to see an Up Next API that would integrate with Watch Later apps. We talk about Watch Later apps on here a lot. We're big fans of the concept, but we'd love to see it expand and integrate even more with the Apple TV app. They have integrations between Apple TV and the streaming apps, so your data can go back and forth between those two. If they could open that up to third-party watch later apps, of course, with all the privacy permissions and all that kind of stuff in place, I think that'd be really cool. On the hardware side, looking forward to the next Apple TV 4K, I'm going to go even a step further on the processor segment. I'm going to say I want either the A17 Pro, the most recent iPhone chip, or maybe even the M3 chip in the next Apple TV.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's a bit of a leap, but it would be pretty incredible to see it come to the Apple TV. Either way, that would bring the latest GPU enhancements to the Apple TV, which I think is really important for gaming especially, to make sure that we've got, the ray tracing and all that kind of stuff included on the next Apple TV. I think that's important. Also, I'd like to see FaceTime camera included on the Apple TV itself. I know some setups wouldn't accommodate that, but personally, the way I have my TV set up, I would love to have just a camera there that I could use for FaceTime instead of having to use continuity camera. Kind of like the eARC, I could kind of see that as like a step towards Apple's ultimate goal of just having the camera in the living room. And then finally, I would love a UWB chip in the remote for easy finding. Of course, you can use Bluetooth LE, but a UWB chip would be even better, and maybe even like a tiny speaker in there just so it can chirp when you've got it lost in the couch cushions and you can find it easily. So those are my wishes for the next Apple TV 4K hardware.
Everything that you've mentioned, I also want. I just probably being a little too realistic with my answers.
Yeah.
There. Tim asks, did you ever hack an original Apple TV to install a huge hard drive or run custom apps?
It's a really cool question. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to participate in that because I came in on the second generation of the Apple TV. I only saw the first gen Apple TV once in person. I thought it was really cool and something I wanted, but I didn't end up getting one until they had the second gen, the little tiny black puck that we kind of still have today.
Yeah, I did, but it wasn't as fun as I hoped it would be, given the limitations. I think you could put stuff on like Plex at the time, which, of course, Plex is now in the App Store and is doing its own thing. I'll be honest, in between the original Apple TV and the smaller puck version that we got, I was using a Mac Mini.
Oh.
But I've always been a proponent of legal purchases and had to find a way of being able to get my iTunes purchases up on the big screen. And so that's what I was doing before the Apple TV, and it was messy. It wasn't a good experience at all. But yeah, that's the way I went, and stayed away from the different nefarious ways of getting shows and movies, and I'm glad that is something that I continue to do.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's important. I actually didn't even know that people were doing hardware mods on the original Apple TV back in the day. That's pretty cool. It's a little bit of a blast from the past. But Simon's going to take us to the future with his question segment. Simon asks, where do you see Apple TV in 5 years? And thinking about this question, the main thing that comes to mind for me is more and more smart home integration. I think Apple has continued to push TV and home as kind of a combined category within their offering. I think they want the Apple TV to be the true center of the smart home, just not in the sense of being a hub, but also in the sense of maybe eventually being some kind of smart display, not just for your cameras, but your whole home and everything that's going on, a way to keep up with things and control things. I'd really like to see them continue to drill down into the Apple TV as the center of their smart home strategy. I think that's really important for the future of the Apple TV. They've got a great thing going on, of course, with video playback and all the codecs and high quality audio and everything. Now I really want to see them go in on the smart home. The other thing I think is going to be interesting to see over the next 5 years is tvOS on new form factors. We've heard it's being tested on an iPad mini right now, but probably eventually some kind of HomePod with a screen, some kind of smart display / smart speaker combo. I think that's going to be interesting to see how tvOS continues to adapt, not only for the big screen, but for smaller screens as well over the next 5 years.
I like it. I like it a lot. And I think your reasoning behind tvOS coming to different form factors and Apple TV being a bigger thing than it once was, it's no longer the hobby. And that's why I'm going to answer this question by saying that I think Apple will actually finally release a TV in the next 5 years. I don't know whether that means that it'll be your traditional TV that we know today, whether or not, rather than go with foldable and rollable screens on a phone, which honestly, I look at the concept from other phone manufacturers and the durability and everything doesn't quite cut it for me, and I don't think would cut it for Apple. Of course, improvements can happen, but where this is really coming in to its stride, I think, from a consumer electronics point of view, are TVs. We've seen rollable TVs from LG for a little while. Now we are seeing come to market after a couple of years of demos, LG's Magnet. I don't know if you know about this. This is the first fully customizable direct view LED system that is formed of parts that magnetize and then can form up to 325 inches.
Wow.
Right? Which is absolutely insane. I think this is the direction that Apple will probably go with their phones, with their iPads, with maybe even the next Studio or Pro XDR display. If they can do that, I could see them bringing out something like this where you can fully customize a screen. I think that would be the way I would like things to go. But the next 5 years, I know he said Apple TV, and I assumed hardware, but I'm also thinking OS. So next 5 years, what I'm going to say OS-wise is very much what you have said, but I'm also going to say gesture control. I think it's going to be a massive part of the Apple TV future. Voice, sign language. I think all of those are going to be really, really important. And we're seeing hints of that already in Vision OS and Apple Vision Pro. I think that will make the tvOS experience truly revolutionary once again. I think it's been a while really since Apple have led. The TV app was something that was amazing and everyone and their mother basically copied the concept, either having their own up next queues within their own apps, or of course the likes of Roku, Google, Amazon have done something very similar. I think that's what I would like Apple to focus on in the next 5 years, the accessibility of the TV experience. How can this really be something that you just walk up to, don't have to think about? Maybe we'll get rid of a remote altogether.
Yeah, that would remove the need for a UWB chip like I suggested. You don't have to find your remote because your hand is the remote. Apple is obviously doing a lot with hand gestures and using that as an input on Apple Vision Pro, on the Apple Watch. And I think the TV makes a lot of sense for it to come there as well. So we'll be keeping an eye out over the next 5 years. I think it's going to be a fun road with the future of the Apple TV.
Now, we got a couple of questions from a good friend of mine over on Instagram. The pseudo-name, that is, Cult of Lasso, asks, have you heard or seen anything regarding unannounced features for the Apple Vision Pro?
Well, I haven't heard anything personally. I don't have any little birdies whispering in my ear. We did get a mention from a YouTuber who tried out the Apple Vision Pro and said that Final Cut Pro is coming to Vision OS. And it sounded like it wasn't the iPad version, but it was something a little bit more native to the platform. So we haven't seen anything with that, but I would love to see what that looks like. Whether that comes with version 1.0 or not, I'm not sure. But that's the thing that really intrigues me that we haven't heard about yet.
I got to say, that was, I think, the most interesting part of the Apple Vision story that hasn't really been spoken about at WWDC. Now, of course, I talked about the fact that originals were coming to Apple Vision Pro and Vision OS via the TV app. We still have to wait to see what actually comes to fruition and what doesn't. Now, we heard about Final Cut Pro from Matti Haapoja, but there were some really interesting conversations because I feel like beyond the prepared demos that were shown to press, there were certain elements that were shown to other creators and other developers, those that are thinking of building fitness apps for Apple Vision Pro, which I thought was really interesting. I also heard that there might be some tools for potential location scouting and modeling, and maybe even for environmental studies. I think they were just little seeds being planted to spur people's imaginations on what they can develop. I'm really interested to see where Apple Vision Pro could maybe go for historians, for education, as well as games, of course. Yeah. We'll just have to wait and see. I think we've been told not even half of the story. I very much look forward to the beginning of next year when we get to hear more.
Definitely. Speaking of things that we would like to hear more about, Cult of Lasso also asks, any news on a release date of the next season of Apple TV Plus's series Trying? No, nothing official. We, of course, know that season 4 is on the way, and I believe we heard that it was in production before the strike, right? Mm-hmm. We should hopefully see it soon. My guess would be that it would be sometime this summer, either like May, June, July time, just based on the way the past 3 seasons have rolled out. That seems to be when Trying is kind of slotted in throughout the year. So that would be my prediction, would be summer 2024.
Friends of mine that worked on the previous productions, I haven't heard anything from. So maybe they're busy on other stuff. But I think before too long, we'll hear more. And I cannot wait. Now, Tim asks, what is your current split for where you watch Apple TV shows? Mostly on Apple TV, iPad, PSVR 2 via PS5, or Christopher Nolan's favourite screen, the iPhone. Interesting. Where do you split your viewing?
Mine mostly depends on, it's kind of like what I was talking about earlier with Up Next Cues. It depends on if I'm watching it with my wife or if I'm watching it by myself. So things that she and I watch together are mostly on the Apple TV. If we're out and about, like maybe on lunch break at work, we'll watch on my iPad Pro. But for the most part, those are on the Apple TV on the big screen. And that's where most of my Apple Original viewing happens. There are a couple of Apple Originals that I watch solo for various reasons. And usually those I'll watch on my iPad Pro just to kind of not take up too much of the TV time. You know, sharing is caring, right? I love my iPad Pro screen. It's great for watching TV in a pinch. But of course, when I can, I always want to watch on the biggest screen available, which is the big screen in my living room. I don't watch any TV on my phone, maybe a little bit of YouTube, but even that, for the most part, I'll go to my iPad for. It's just a lot better. Bigger screens are better. That's my hot take on watching TV shows and any sort of video. What about you, Sigmund?
I mean, I'm going to agree, aren't I? Bigger screens are better. I watch Apple Originals on the TV. Some screeners I will watch on the iPad mini when I'm out and about and at a pinch to fit it all in ahead of one of our episodes. My LG OLED is actually my second screen. The home theater is where I watch original films and high production spectacles. It's going to be really interesting once Apple Vision Pro comes out, which way I'll go. One thing that I do miss a little bit, when the TV app first launched on PlayStation, I would get on a chat and talk to my friends and watch the same show together. This was before, of course, SharePlay on Apple TV. In a way, there were fewer steps because you were so used to the way to start a chat and you had to just count to 3 and all hit play at the same time. And it worked for the majority of the time. So I like doing it that way. I was given a PlayStation Portal recently to test out. I don't know if you know about this. It's a new device from PlayStation, and it's like a DualSense controller with an 8-inch screen in the middle. And I thought, oh my gosh, this would be amazing. Plug in some headphones, watch, and then have a chat with friends whilst we watch together. Those of my friends that use the TV app but aren't Apple users. So that was the plan. Unfortunately, it turns out you cannot stream apps. whilst in remote play, which is bonkers to me, but you can play games. So that idea is out the window, and so really is the PlayStation Portal for the most part. So if anyone has ways of doing something similar, let me know, because of course FaceTime, whilst it's available everywhere, SharePlay isn't. Simon asks, do you prefer watching an episode a week, or will you wait until able to watch in a batch? And I think this is for streaming in general, right?
Yeah, I think so. Because this is a question not only for Apple, but for all the streamers. How do you release your shows, right? Do you go week to week? Do you do a batch release all at once? Do you do some kind of hybrid, which Apple kind of started, and I think a lot of streamers have jumped onto that. Netflix have tried a little bit of a slower rollout with some of their shows instead of batching them all at once. Personally, I prefer week to week. I used to be a binger. I used to be someone who would kind of let things build up and then just knock them out all at once, but personally, I find it easier to just watch things in shorter bursts. And I also find it enjoyable just to sit with things for a little while instead of just consuming it all at once and maybe forgetting half of what I just saw. So going week to week, you have a little bit more time to absorb, to converse with people about what's going on and share your theories and, come up with ideas that are really wrong on a podcast that lots of people listen to and then have to talk about that later. Personally, I love the week-to-week rollout. I think it's great. I do think that premieres, having multiple episodes is a good idea just to help people get into a series. But I think week-to-week really is the way to go. Now, I will admit, sometimes I just can't help myself. You and I do, as a part of making this podcast, have access often to early releases of episodes. And sometimes I just have to get ahead and find out what happens next on something. But for the most part, I try to keep myself to week because I think it's a better experience.
I'm the same if I can help myself, right? However, when it comes to Apple Originals, I feel like we have a duty to be ahead a little bit. But I will try and hold off past the premiere episodes, mainly because the screeners that we have access to don't always have the finished audio mix most of the time. And as anyone knows, audio is half of the picture when it comes to these productions. And that's why on every given occasion, I will shame Max for limiting Dolby Atmos and the art and craft that goes into those mixes to their top tier subscribers. It's absolutely bonkers, and more should be said about it. But before I get into a rant, what's our next question?
This is a fun one. Tim asks, without looking, can you name the still yet to be released Apple TV show coming next year that was discussed in episode 1 of Magic Rays of Light? I don't know which one of us wants to try this first segment. I don't think either of us checked. We didn't cheat, right?
No.
Good.
Episode 1, of course, with guest Benjamin Mayo, who is the nicest guy. I've got to say, because it is the first production from Apple Studios that anyone was aware of, from executive producers Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, Masters of the Air. That's what I'm going to go for. Neither of us know. Is that what you were going to go for?
That was my guess for sure, because we have talked about how long it's been in the pipeline and trying to picture what would be discussed on the first episode of the show. I did listen to the first episode, but of course it's been quite some time. So my guess was Masters of the Air as well. But because we didn't check, Tim, you're going to have to write in and let us know if we got it right. Thanks for that little bit of our own podcast history trivia.
Brandon McMullen asks, as a fairly new listener to the show, what are some older and or lesser known Apple TV Plus shows that you would recommend? This is an easy one for me. One show that I feel like has been completely overlooked because sadly it didn't get a second season, but it stole my heart and I still worry about the dad daily. Little Voice from 2020. This has music from Sarah Bareilles and was executive produced by her alongside J.J. Abrams. I loved every moment of this show. Highly, highly recommend. Even though there's never going to be a second season, I think there's enough there for the family to enjoy. It's a really good family sit down, some great music, some great acting. Beyond that, and I think this is probably going to say more about my personal tastes, Mr. Corman, a highlight for me. It's a comedy, but says some really important things on mental health. Another show that does so, but I think in a more comedic way, even though this is a dramatized show, The Shrink Next Door, which is based off of the Wondery podcast. Highly, highly recommend. You've always loved Paul Rudd until you've seen him in this show. He is horrible, and that's really hard to do. It's a really, really underrated performance alongside Will Ferrell, who is, once again, when he has a chance, just fantastic in a dramatic role. And then lastly, I had to end on this as a show that I feel like is going to get overlooked. So if you're a new listener, you may have already overlooked this. M. Night Shyamalan's Servant, which was my favourite show from the very first teaser, which was shown, I think it was during the Emmy Awards. I saw the first teasers and it absolutely gripped me. I loved everything about this show. I loved the mystery behind it. I loved the different directors that were brought on and the collaborative nature of this. I thought having the platform at Apple to be able to do something like that by bringing in young directors from different backgrounds was something really, really special that M. Night Shyamalan decided to do, and I really hope directors follow in those footsteps with any upcoming projects that they have. I also managed to get a few interviews in, which you can check out in earlier episodes of Magic Rays of Light. Toby Kebbell, an absolute joy to talk to, alongside Rupert Grint, who was described as spaghetti bolognese by Toby Kebbell during that interview, and the great Lauren Ambrose. So, yeah, Servant, definitely one to check out if you haven't yet.
Yes, definitely do not miss out on Servant, one of the very earliest Apple originals to release, but also one of our favorites, and one that, if you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth checking out. I've got a few deep cuts as well from the Apple original library. First up, Lisey's Story from 2021. This one fell off the radar pretty quickly after it came out. It's a Stephen King adaptation. What I like about it, it's got some of those horror elements, but it also has some interesting things to say about creativity and the creative process and the cost of being a creative person, which I thought was interesting. Little America, which premiered in 2020 and had a second season last year. It's an anthology series about immigrants coming to the United States and all kinds of just different, unique, and interesting stories that they bring with them. Uplifting series for the most part, and one that I would recommend checking out. Gave us The Nigerian Cowboy, who I know you also had an opportunity to interview on an early episode of Magic Rays of Light.
Confidence. What a lovely bloke.
Yeah, he still needs his own Apple original series, I think. We're still waiting on that one to be announced. Another one is Calls from 2021. This was a really interesting series. It's an audio narrative about an apocalypse that plays out through phone calls. And so you're basically listening to the phone call, reading a transcription, and you see these waveforms that look a lot like what you see now on the Dynamic Island when you're listening to music or podcasts. Very cool visuals to go along with the storytelling, and an interesting, innovative way of telling that story. And then, of course, I have to end with Schmigadoon, which premiered in 2021. One of my favorite Apple originals. It's a musical series. It's won some awards. It's got some recognition. I'm always going to say it deserves more than it gets. But if you miss Schmigadoon, if you like musicals at all, it's very much an homage to the musical genre, while also, kind of poking fun at it just a little bit as well. But it's worth checking out.
I love those picks. I will say Calls is one that really fell under the radar. If we get season 2, can we please get this in Apple Vision Pro, or can we have an enhanced version? I think that would be absolutely wild. I remember when the screeners came out for that show, I checked it out with the Hue Lightsync box.
Oh, yeah.
For that extra experience. I'd love to see that show come in enhanced form to Vision Pro. Of course, the different environments on Apple Vision Pro, I think, align really well with this next question. And Simon asks, if stuck on the moon, desert island, which one Apple TV original show would you choose to watch? And I think we should probably both say this on the count of 3 and then give our reasons.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. For All Mankind.
Well, of course, we'd have the same answer. I mean, if you're stuck on the moon, you have to bring For All Mankind with you, right? That's the only one that would make sense. But realistically, this show, I feel like it's one that has a lot of replay value as well as a lot of variety, because you're covering different decades. You get a lot of different pop culture, even down to the soundtrack. You're going to cover a lot of ground there. So as far as going back to it over and over and over throughout multiple years and decades, I feel like it's one that you could stick with and not get bored by.
It's also a show full of hope, right? As well as exploration.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're stuck in the moon, especially, you'll need that hope. Tim asks, what spoiler are you most upset you discovered before watching a movie or TV show? Not sure how to answer this in a non-spoilery way. Good luck, Devin. What have we got?
I'm going to talk about things that are old enough that I feel like they aren't really spoilers anymore. I feel like there's kind of a term limit on those. Personally, I would love to go back in time and watch Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, not knowing what was going to happen. Of course, I'm not old enough for that. I grew up knowing the big twist in that film. But I have to imagine that seeing that for the first time in theaters, if you could have done it without it being ruined for you, that had to be just absolutely incredible. Now, personally, in reality, the one that stings most, I'm a big fan of The Masked Singer. And during the first season of The Masked Singer, everyone was so obsessed with figuring out who was going to win and who was under the mask. And it turned out it was T-Pain in a monster costume. And that got ruined for me before I got to watch the finale. And I was really disappointed.
My God.
Welcome to my world, Sigmund.
Yeah.
Star Wars and The Masked Singer.
Honestly, I don't think much has been spoilt for me. I think Lost was spoilt for me before I saw the end. But that was a show that I felt there was enough going on in to be able to devote my time to. The one film that I do regret knowing the end to is David Fincher's Zodiac. It's so ominous and so weird, and there is a mystery to it, but unfortunately someone ruined it for me. Also, something that seems to happen in my household, if my grandfather doesn't want to watch something, he will inadvertently spoil it so that we don't want to watch it. Which is terrible, but it's something I have to deal with. Another question from Tim. Thank you for all the questions, Tim. Do you have a favourite director?
I had to think about this one a little bit because I'm not as in tune with that world as you are, Sigmund. I know that you know a lot more about the world of directing than I do. But thinking about it, I have to go with the Russo brothers, Joe and Anthony Russo, based on so many different projects they've been in that I love, including Apple original film Cherry. They also were really big on Community. And then, of course, they've made a lot of contributions to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, including Avengers Endgame, which they directed. So they've touched on so many different projects that I love. And, of course, those projects wouldn't have been the same without them. So they're my favorite directors.
I got to say, this is a really tough one. So I'm not going to answer the question in the way that it was asked. I'm going to give a few directors, one underrated, one modern, great, and two that I think are upcoming. My underrated, for anyone that really is new to film and doesn't really dive into the older stuff beyond maybe an Alfred Hitchcock or a Akira Kurosawa, is Federico Fellini. Fantastic filmmaker from Italy. 8.5, I would say, is the film that I would start with when going through his repertoire. Just really beautiful filmmaking. Highly recommended. My modern great is Quentin Tarantino. I think he's a provocateur of sorts, which I like. But also, he started off as someone that works in a video rental store and managed to get his first script to screen with Natural Born Killers, I believe. But his films are just odes to different genres. And if you have insider knowledge, and even if you don't, there's just so much that you can get back from rewatching his films. He has said to us that he's going to grace us with only a certain number of films, and I think the next one is either his last or his second to last, depending on which way he goes about things. Yeah, Pulp Fiction, amazing. Reservoir Dogs, The Kill Bills, Django Unchained, very controversial, but loved every moment of that. If you want to see Leonardo DiCaprio at his most maniacal, that's a film to check out. And then recently, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is just brilliant as well. And then lastly, an upcoming duo. I'm going to call them upcoming, but actually I think their most notable film came out a good few years ago now. And that is Ben and Josh Safdie, otherwise known as the Safdie brothers. Ben now appearing in the likes of Oppenheimer and the new A24 Showtime show, The Curse. They are just absolutely fantastic in their direction and in their productions as well. Really, really excited to see what they've got coming. I think they've signed a deal with Netflix, so you can see some original shows from them. But their films and their style of film are stress-inducing, and for some reason, even though that shouldn't be the kind of film that I should want to see, it's a film I cannot resist. Uncut Gems with Adam Sandler. If you've seen it, you probably had a bit of a surprise. If you haven't, please do. Have you seen Uncut Gems?
You're going to ask me this on the podcast, Sigmund. I have not seen Uncut Gems. It's on my list. I need to watch it, but I haven't yet.
Okay. High recommendation for you for when you're not allowed to go to sleep. This will keep you up. So highly, highly recommended.
Well, that is our very first Ask Us Anything. Thank you so much to all the listeners who sent in questions. That was a lot of fun. Some really interesting questions. We have some really smart listeners, and I appreciate their thoughtfulness in sending in these questions. But we thought we'd end our 100th episode Ask Us Anything celebration by asking each other one question each. So what have you got for me, Sigmund?
Okay, well, you know how I like to recommend stuff to you. And I do recommend films and TV shows that I think are going to be slightly outside of your wheelhouse, things that you wouldn't necessarily pick yourself. So what's the worst show or movie recommendation I've given to you since we've become friends?
Oh, gosh. Well, you seem really fixated on getting me to watch something in the Chucky universe, either Child's Play or the Chucky TV show, which I've been very resistant to. Or, some of your reality TV picks, the dating shows, some of those have been a little questionable. But I have to say, for the most part, you don't miss, Sigmund. I really appreciate and enjoy all your recommendations. And like you said, it is pushing me outside my comfort zone and forcing me to explore the world of film a little bit more. And that kind of leads to my question for you, something I've actually wanted to ask you for a long time. I thought this was a good opportunity. You have a knack for identifying and analyzing the more technical aspects of films, and I love hearing your thoughts on those areas of filmmaking. So I wanted to ask, where did your appreciation for that technical side of the film world come from? And if someone is looking to develop that skill of recognizing these elements, do you have any advice for them starting out?
It's a great question. When I started to develop my love for film, that began with VHS that then later became DVD. And in the advent of DVD, we got extras, whether they were commentaries, behind the scenes. And I've been absolutely addicted to those extras. When Blu-ray arrived, I'd get Blu-rays from whatever region had the best extras, had that exclusive commentary that you needed. And I'm really, really grateful that the TV app and Apple continue to include those extras with films that you purchase through the TV app or iTunes Movies. I'd love to see those extras also come to TV shows as well. And I think there is a disconnect at the moment. There is so much, and I'm going to use the word content out there, right? Whether it's podcasts, whether it's YouTube, whether it's TV shows, films, reality TV, whatever it might be. And of course, there are only so many hours in a day to be able to consume it all. For that reason, I think it's really important that we still have an idea of the creative process that goes behind bringing those experiences to us. I can't remember who said it during the introduction of Apple TV Plus, pre-launch of Apple TV Plus, but it was said how filmmakers want to be able to use the skills that they have to shine a light on different viewpoints and different perspectives on the world. And I think not only do we see that in terms of the script and everything else, but the way something is presented, we see that diversity on our screens. And why wouldn't you want to know how something was made? I actually probably get more joy out of finding out how something is done than doing it, right? Everything is a learning process. And however that inspires you, it doesn't necessarily need to be a direct inspiration. I think you can take a lot of inspiration from filmmaking. So to answer your question, start with making of, start with commentaries. Learn, I think, to listen. Everyone's wanting a voice, everyone's wanting attention. But what I think people have lost a lot in this modern era is the ability to listen. There are some incredible directors out there and incredible filmmakers, not just directors, cinematographers out there that really are giving you everything that they've learned and just giving it to you. It's a completely different era, and it blows my mind that someone so world-renowned will give you a few hours and sit down and walk you through it. So I hope that kind of answers the question. I think what we do here is really well balanced in the sense of, yeah, I have that kind of nerdy side of me, and you approach your film and TV show reviews on the way that the shows or films make you feel and the deeper message behind what they're trying to give, or at least what you took from it. I have loved and will continue to love doing this podcast with you, Devon. Yeah, 100 episodes of Magic Rays of Light.
100 episodes and hundreds more to come. Thanks for sharing that, Sigmund. That was really great. Definitely some stuff in there that I'm going to think on and try to put into practice, and hopefully something that our listeners can benefit from as well. So that's been a fun way to celebrate 100 episodes, something a little bit different. Hopefully our listeners enjoyed it as well. Thanks again to everyone who sent in questions. Now, of course, it wouldn't be an episode of Magic Rays of Light if we didn't share with you all of this week's Apple TV releases. There is a ton coming over the next week. Let's start on Friday. We've got the release of the Spirited sing-along version. So if you've wanted to master all the lyrics to Good Afternoon or Bringing Back Christmas or any of the other wonderful songs from that film, here's your chance to sing along with it. New holiday specials from The Snoopy Show, Frog and Toad, and Shape Island. And, of course, new episodes of both Monarch Legacy of Monsters and For All Mankind. So a great weekend on Apple TV+.
Of course, that's only where the weekend begins. because on Saturday we have the return of MLS Season Pass. These are the conference finals, otherwise known as the semi-finals. Cincinnati v Columbus and LAFC versus Houston Dynamo. You can also look out for a bonus episode of Magic Rays of Light midweek next week to preview the first MLS Cup final on Apple TV and MLS Season Pass. Of course, on Monday, you have another podcast, Apple Original Podcast, The Pirate of Prague. But on Tuesday, Devon, we have a stack of releases when it comes to gaming and Apple Arcade.
Yes, Apple are getting out a great lineup for December, and they're doing it all on the same day, starting with Disney Dreamlight Valley Arcade Edition. This is a life simulator adventure game featuring, of course, your favorite Disney and Pixar characters. It's a pretty big get for Apple Arcade to have Disney Dreamlight Valley on the service, so I'm definitely going to be checking that out. We've also got Sonic Dream Team, a 3D adventure featuring Sonic and 5 of his friends as playable characters. So if you're a Sonic fan, definitely check that out. Puzzle & Dragons Story, a match 3 puzzle RPG from the makers of the popular series Puzzle & Dragons. And finally, Turmoil Plus, which this is interesting. It's a 19th century oil drilling simulator. Kind of gave me Oregon Trail vibes looking at the artwork. It's very old school, but I guess if you've ever wanted to pretend to run an oil rig in the 19th century, now's your opportunity on Apple Arcade.
Very cool. Back to Apple Originals on Wednesday, we have the premiere of John Lennon, Murder Without a Trial. This is a 3-part documentary commemorating the passing of John Lennon in a way that's never been done before. Some great insight here. Cannot wait to talk about this documentary series on the show next week. That follows a new episode of Slow Horses and the penultimate episode of The Buccaneers. And if that wasn't enough, of course, we have some extras, Devon, starting with Jamie Bernstein, the daughter of Leonard Bernstein, talking about the soundtrack to Maestro, which is the upcoming film directed by Bradley Cooper, just about to make it to cinemas and coming to Netflix in December. That's on Apple Music in video form and in audio form via the Apple Music Classical app. Just a fantastic conversation there. When it comes to Apple Originals, we have the extra She Made This, a behind-the-scenes featurette for lessons in chemistry. But we also got an Apple Original of sorts earlier this week that I know you want to highlight.
The Lost Voice is an Apple short film directed by Taika Waititi honoring International Day of Persons with Disabilities on December 3rd. It stars Dr. Tristram Ingham using personal voice on his iPhone to read a bedtime story to a child. It's a narrative way of highlighting, of course, some of Apple's accessibility features. It's a really sweet little film that shows the power of the personal voice feature, the ability to synthesize your own voice if you're anticipating losing the ability to speak, and still be able to communicate with your loved ones using your own voice. It also comes with an accompanying ebook of the same name, a cute little children's book that is actually being read from in the film, so you can check both of those out via the links in the show notes. Well, let's end the episode with our Up Next picks, our recommendations that we make every week. This week, I want to point out a huge update to one of my favorite apps. That's Play by Marcos Tanaka. It had its big 2.0 update this week, bringing a couple of really big features and a new business model that I'm actually really excited about. First up, you can organize your tags and smart searches into folders. So if you're someone who spends a lot of time watching YouTube videos, you have a lot of them saved, you can now categorize your tags into larger folders and clean up your library a little bit if you've got a ton of tags in there. I know I personally categorize my videos based on pretty broad categories like music and TV and tech, but I could definitely see myself having more fine-tuned tags now and using those broader categories as folders. I think that's really cool. The big addition, though, is called Channels, and it's the ability to actually follow YouTube channels from within Play itself. So rather than having to go find a link outside of Play and add it in there by copying it or using the share sheet or shortcuts, you can actually follow channels from the app itself It'll give you a chronological list of all the videos from the channels that you follow, and then you can swipe one way to add them to your library or swipe them the other way to remove them from the list if it's not something that you want to watch. And so this is just a really clean and elegant way to follow YouTube channels without having to worry about getting distracted or, having algorithmic suggestions and things like that. It's just, these are the channels that I want to see. These are the videos that I want to sift through. So I've followed a ton of channels in there now, including, of course, Apple TV. So when I open up Play, all the latest trailers and clips and extras show up there, and I can very easily add them to my Play library to watch them later. It's a really well done feature. Marcos has really thought it through. If you get a ton of videos in that channel's view, you can actually filter them by certain criteria that you set. And if you just get completely overwhelmed and need a reset, you can just instantly remove them all and start over. This has got me using Play a lot more. I've used Play since it came out for Watch Later, but now it's my go-to place for anything YouTube. It's where I start, and it really is perfect for that. It's an awesome addition to the app. Have you had a chance to try out the channels feature in Play yet?
I have. I've been doing this with YouTube specifically because there was a big return this past week in WWE. My favorite wrestler came back, Mr. CM Punk. And I have spent way too much time this week watching reactions of people. I started adding all of these reactions, and then once I had enough, I was just like, one push and everything's gone. Marcus Tanaka just doing some incredible things with his suite of apps. Highly recommend. Go and support this developer alongside the other developers that we mentioned in last week's episode, even now that the sales are over. Now, as far as my up next picks, I, of course, am going the route of movies, as I always do, Devon. The Holdovers is in the TV app. This is a new film about a cranky history teacher at a remote prep school who's forced to remain on campus over the holidays with a troubled student who has no place to go. This is from director Alexandra Payne, stars Paul Giamatti as a curmudgeoning instructor at a New England prep school who babysits a handful of students with nowhere to go, but soon forms an unlikely bond with a brainy but damaged troublemaker and with the school's head cook, a woman who just lost a son in the Vietnam War. The trailer for this felt very kind of soft and very cozy. This is definitely one that you want to cozy down with a nice hot drink and some blankets. It definitely has a holiday Christmas feeling, but of course you can tell there are deeper elements involved in this as well. And if you're a fan of either Paul Giamatti or Alexandra Payne, I think you're going to love this. Cannot wait to check this out personally over the weekend. And finally, my other up next pick is May December. This is a new feature releasing on Netflix after what has been a short run in the cinemas recently. 20 years after the notorious tabloid romance, a married couple buckle under the pressure when a Hollywood actress meets them to do research for a film about their past. This is directed by Todd Haynes, comes from a script from Sammy Birch, and stars the incomparable duo of Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore, who of course was involved in Lacey's Story, which was mentioned earlier in this podcast episode. In closing for this week, Devon, I want to just very quickly say a big thank you to everyone that listens week in, week out, or, even if you have a break, hello and welcome back. We love hearing from you. And this was a really special episode in terms of feedback. So thank you so much for that. Hopefully we can do more of that soon. I also want to say a big thank you to all of our guests and contributors in the time that we've been doing this podcast. Big special shout out, I think, must go to James Lees and Jonathan Reed, who have contributed to the podcast many times and remain very good friends. Also wanted to put out a very quick shout out to Benjamin Mayo, who helped me with the very first episode and spurred me on to do this week in, week out. So thank you so much to him. But lastly, thank you to you, Devon, for jumping on board. You were once a listener. Now this is very much your show, as it is mine. And it's just an absolute joy to be able to share this stage with you week in, week out.
Well, thank you, buddy. I feel the exact same way. It's been a great first 100, and I'm just so thankful that we get to do this together every week. So one more time, thank you so much to everyone for listening and for everyone who's been a part of Magic Rays of Light over these first 100 episodes. That's it for this week. If you want to reach out, of course, you can contact us on social media via the links in the show notes. You can email the show or send us an iMessage to mrolfm@screentimes.net. We'll be back next week for episode 101 with a look at John Lennon, Murder Without a Trial. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and
once again, thanks for listening.